Hi, my name's Joe, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing the book Lessons from the Samurai by Fred Neff, published in 1987. Now, Fred Neff published a lot of books during the mid-80s through early 90s. When I was growing up, there were a lot of them in the library. So when I became a grown-up, went out and bought a bunch of them. I'd say that was influenced partly by sentimental reasons, but also reading them as an adult, they do stand up in certain ways. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find out a whole lot about the author himself. There's a little blurb on the back that says that he's a 5th degree black belt in karate and that he is proficient in judo, jujitsu, traditional jujitsu, and kempo. And in this book he does mention learning some traditional jujitsu and learning some judo. Now, it should be noted, the reason I remember these growing up as a kid, they are technically classified as juvenile literature. So he was writing, I guess, with the intention of talking to, a younger audience, maybe teens, based on the language used. Not that it's rough language, but it's definitely not baby talk. So I would suggest that even as an adult, I don't feel like it's necessarily talking down to me by any stretch. Now, the book starts off with a chapter on sort of an overview of Japanese/samurai history. And it serves its purpose as a good intro. There's not a whole lot in depth, but it does, cover some of the more fundamental stuff concerning those aspects of Japanese history. And then there's a chapter on the philosophy of Bushido, as well as warrior habits or mindsets. So, the tone of the book is really trying to make the connection to, we're carrying on in spirit the tradition of the samurai. As with most of Mr. Neff's books, there's a Q&A section that today might have been thought of as an FAQ, frequently asked questions. But I think it does a pretty good job insofar as tone and information goes. Like, if you're picking up this book for the first time, if you have no background in martial arts, these might be some of the things on your mind, and here are his answers. The chapters on technique cover stance, movement, and footwork. Movement also includes upper body movement, what in Japanese I think we would call taisabaki. It also includes upper and lower body strikes as well as striking combinations. He also has a chapter on throws and sweeps, foot sweeps. Some of them are sort of unusual. There's one where you basically you spin as if you were to execute a spinning kick or spinning back fist or elbow. And you spin and you grab the guy's gi and then sweep him in the opposite direction from which you turned. It's interesting. Ever since seeing it, I've kind of wanted to pull it off. I don't think I've ever tried. But it's also not something that you would see in a grappling setting, in judo randori or anything like that, because you're not going to do that. There is a chapter on escapes, which is basically your self-defense chapter. It includes defenses against, pushes, bear hugs, headlocks. Includes a fair amount of strikes. What's interesting to me, and something that I think is worth sort of taking points off for, when he's showing a defense, sometimes the defense ends in a joint lock, but there is no instruction prior to that on how to execute the joint lock. So for the first time ever, here you go locking up a guy's elbow. But wait, what are the details of that? What am I supposed to be doing? A common feature of Mr. Neff's books includes a chapter on strategy and like how to defend yourself against different types of attackers, from like kickers, rushers, grapplers. Most of the information there still holds up. I really appreciate that section. And I don't think there are enough things like that included in martial arts books these days. One thing I will note is that there seems to be an awful lot of karate in his jujitsu. And that seems unusual. Like you're doing, like the inside out block, which is nothing I've seen in most Japanese jiu-jitsu. Not the Koryu, not the Gendai that I've been exposed to, with the exception of people who've clearly had a karate influence. So he doesn't talk about what style of jiu-jitsu it is, which is interesting. And I sort of wonder if this was maybe an attempt to, I'm primarily a karate guy, but I learned some of these throws and locks from my study of judo and jiu-jitsu. I'm going to include those in a book and call it Lessons from the Samurai. I don't think that that's a bad thing, but it does sort of have a different flavor than I think one will find in most books on traditional jiu-jitsu. Other chapters include a chapter on warm-ups, how to limber up, things from, rotating the wrists to doing splits. There's also a chapter on meditation, which is a nice section to have. Now, the prose of this book, I like the history. Again, it's nothing in-depth, but I think it's a very solid introduction for people who are unfamiliar with, the history of the samurai or Japanese martial arts. I think having the philosophy bit in there is a nice touch, goes over the samurai virtues, although it does not cover them in Japanese. Something that might be considered missing from this book, there's sort of a lack of Japanese terms. If you are like really into learning, traditional jiu-jitsu, that would be another reason maybe to avoid the book. There are also chapters on strategy that as I said, I think still hold up, and teaching / training considerations. Like he's got an enumerated section where it's like, number 8, don't practice without a supervisor. Number 6, I think, if you're sparring, stop half an inch or an inch before, touching your training partner. So I think as far as having an understanding of like an introduction to martial arts in general, and maybe this format of martial arts in particular, I think it does a pretty good job there. And even though, again, it's classified as juvenile literature, I do think that it still holds up pretty well. Again, as an adult, I didn't feel talked down to whatsoever. So, the language and tone are still pretty spot on. As far as the negatives go, I do think it's a bit brief. I would like to have seen more instruction on joint locks for a book on, samurai fighting arts. We do get a brief section on wrist locks, but we're talking like a page on the outward wrist lock and the inward wrist lock. And considering that the book was presenting several other different types of locks, I just wish there'd been more instruction on that. As is frequent with books around this time, and even so, still today. I think some of the self-defense stuff is questionable. Some of it holds up pretty well. It has, you know, pretty good defenses against, you know, for instance, a full Nelson. But there are others that I'm just, I don't know if that's a good idea. You know, like trying to kick your way out of a rear bear hug. It's unfortunate that I included this in my notes in the negative section because upon reflection, again, a lot of the basic escapes still hold up pretty well, so maybe I should have included some of those in the pros. If anything else, it is a bit brief, and if you were looking for like an in-depth study of, you know, Japanese jujitsu, you know, samurai fighting like Yawara or Taijutsu, this isn't really for that. But overall, a very not bad book. So, who would I recommend this for? I only hesitate to recommend it at all because I don't know. I think it's out of publication. So, it might be hard to get a hold of. But if you have a casual interest in martial arts, you might pick this up. You know, like I said, great intro, you know, good stuff on how to train, lacks a little bit of depth. Going forward, I'm not sure if I'm going to continue to review Mr. Neff's books, not necessarily because I don't think they deserve it. You know, again, I enjoyed them growing up, and as an adult, most of them still hold up pretty well. It's just that most of them follow a similar pattern. You know, there's an awful lot of, you know, overlap between the different texts. So time will tell, but I would suggest that it may be the better part of a year before I get around to a second Fred Neff book. Again, not any disrespect toward the author or the books. I've enjoyed them since I'm actually about this tall now, but since I was a little kid. You know, they're just sort of a bit samey. So, feel a little bit bad saying that. But it's true. So, until next time, you know, please like and subscribe, leave a comment if you'd like, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.